Before the roaring engines, before the coal-black skies, before the world was reshaped by steel and steam, humanity lived in a kind of silence. A silence broken only by the rhythm of nature, the turning of seasons, the crack of wooden wheels, and the quiet hum of hand-powered labor. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just a technological shift. It was the moment civilization tore itself away from 10,000 years of tradition and stepped into the complete unknown. In this documentary, we're going deeper than the textbooks, deeper than the myths, deeper than the simplified stories you've heard. Because the truth is far more brutal and far more astonishing. So before we begin, make sure you watch till the end. The final section reveals a secret transformation that historians rarely talk about, the part where the Industrial Revolution didn't just change machines, it changed human beings. And hey, if you're new here, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. Drop a like and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Which invention do you think changed the world the most? Alright, let's go back farther than steam, farther than factories, to the very last moments of the old world. For most of human history, life was agricultural. Nearly 90% of people lived on farms, growing just enough to survive. The average person's life was brutally short, maybe 35 to 40 years. This wasn't because humans were weak, but because humanity was trapped in a cycle it just couldn't escape: low productivity. Think about it. If a family grew wheat, it took weeks of backbreaking labor to harvest, thresh, and process it all by hand. If a weaver made cloth, it required days of manual spinning and stitching. The world's population grew slowly, painfully, and it pretty much stagnated for millennia. Then, in the mid-1700s, something extraordinary happened. A series of inventions, seemingly small, began to ripple through society. One of the very first came from a humble English carpenter named John Kay, who invented the flying shuttle in 1733. This device nearly doubled a weaver's speed overnight. But here's the crazy part. Instead of celebrating him, angry handweavers accused him of destroying their jobs. They burned his house, chased him out of town, and forced him to flee to France. Even in its infancy, technological progress came with blood. But Kay's shuttle triggered a chain reaction he never could have predicted. With weaving now so much faster, spinning thread suddenly became the new bottleneck. The world needed more yarn, more cotton, more material, but the manual spinning wheel simply couldn't keep up. Nature was moving too slowly. Humanity wanted more. Enter James Hargreaves, a poor weaver from Lancashire, who created the spinning jenny. This device allowed one worker to spin 8 threads at once, then 16, then 100. And once again, riots erupted. Workers destroyed the machines, factories were burned, and yet, nothing could stop the tide. Because the economics were unstoppable, machines made things faster, cheaper, and better. By 1769, when Richard Arkwright invented the water frame, the revolution became irreversible. Arkwright wasn't just an inventor. He was a businessman, a mastermind of organization. He built the first true modern factory, powered by a massive water wheel, running day and night. For the first time in history, workers didn't control their own labor. The factory did. People had to arrive on time, leave on time, and obey the constant rhythm of machines. The 9-to-5 work culture, the punch clock, the wage system, all of it was born right here. And this is the part of the Industrial Revolution most textbooks just ignore. It didn't just industrialize machines, it industrialized people. Villagers, women, even children as young as 5 were pulled into these factories. They worked grueling 14-hour shifts, breathing in cotton dust, their fingers bleeding from the machinery, with overseers whipping those who slowed down. And yet, even in the midst of this brutality, a strange paradox arose. For many, the wages were more consistent than farm life. It was prosperity through suffering. But the real explosion didn't start until something darker was discovered, something buried deep under England: coal. For thousands of years, humans had burned wood. But by the 1700s, forests were running dry. Coal seemed like a cheap, powerful alternative. But mining it was absolutely deadly. Boys as young as 6 crawled through tunnels no bigger than their bodies, dragging coal with ropes tied around their waists. Explosions, cave-ins, toxic gases, drowning. This was the hidden human cost powering the Industrial Revolution. Yet coal was only the beginning. The real miracle was steam, raw mechanical power extracted from simple boiling water. And this breakthrough came from one man, James Watt. Now Watt didn't invent the steam engine. He perfected it. His improved, hyper-efficient design completely captured the world's imagination. Suddenly, factory owners could power machines anywhere, anytime. No rivers, no water wheels, no limits. But Watt's invention came with consequences he never could have imagined. With steam, machines multiplied, production exploded. Cities swelled beyond recognition. London's population doubled, then tripled. Thick smoke filled the air, streets became rivers of mud and sewage. Diseases like cholera and typhoid spread like wildfire. Half of all children died before the age of 5, but the wealthy grew richer. A new middle class was born, and the world's economic engine shifted permanently. Now here's a fact almost no one knows. The Industrial Revolution didn't begin because of innovation alone. It began because Britain had 3 very rare advantages at the same time: massive coal reserves close to the surface, a banking and credit system willing to fund risky inventions, and vast global trade networks fueled by colonial exploitation. This is the part history books often sanitize. The Industrial Revolution was not purely a story of genius and progress. It was also powered by slave labor, colonial extraction, and staggering global inequality. The cotton mills in Manchester were fueled by cotton picked by enslaved Africans in the American South. British textile factories systematically destroyed India's traditional weaving industry, plunging millions of people into poverty. The revolution created unprecedented wealth, but it also created unprecedented suffering. It lifted millions up, while crushing millions more. And then came transportation. What steam did for factories, railways did for the entire world. The first commercial railway, the Stockton and Darlington Line in 1825, changed absolutely everything. Goods that once took weeks to move by horse and cart could now travel in mere hours. The price of food dropped, cities became interconnected. Time itself became standardized, all because trains required synchronized schedules. Before railways, every town kept its own local time. After railways, the entire world began running on clock time. The Industrial Revolution didn't just reshape society, it reshaped reality itself. Factories, railways, coal, steam, banking, colonialism, urbanization, child labor, public health crises, mass production, automation, capitalism, environmental destruction, human rights movements, scientific breakthroughs, and lifespans that doubled in a century. This is the world the Industrial Revolution created. A world of incredible contradictions, prosperity and misery, innovation and exploitation, progress and ruin. It's the world we still live in today, shaped by the ghosts of steam and steel. If you could travel back in time to the heart of the Industrial Revolution, you wouldn't smell progress. You'd smell coal dust, sweat, molten metal, and fear. While we're taught that this era built the modern world, it did so on a foundation of exploitation, desperation, and an unstoppable force that changed humanity forever. This is the story of the dark engine of progress. To understand it, we have to start with the factories, the new cathedrals of industry. Before this, work happened in small cottages and workshops. But by the late 18th century, colossal buildings like Richard Arkwright's Cromford Mill began pulling workers into massive, centralized operations running day and night. These weren't just workplaces. They were machines themselves, swallowing hundreds of people and coordinating them like cogs. Inside these walls, time itself was re-engineered. The natural rhythm of the sun was replaced by the shrill scream of a factory bell. The clock became a whip. You didn't work until the job was done. You worked until the clock said you could stop often 14 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. And who were these workers? A shocking number were children, some as young as 5. It wasn't just random cruelty. It was cold economic logic. Their small bodies could crawl under massive running machines to clear debris. They were cheaper, faster, and easier to discipline. Some historians estimate that in the early textile mills, nearly half the workforce was made up of children. A moment of exhaustion, a dropped tool, a single slip could mean losing a limb, or your life. Factory owners packed machines as tightly as possible to save space, leaving almost no room for human error. This industrial explosion didn't just change work. It mutated entire cities. Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield. They erupted into industrial hubs almost overnight. Manchester's population tripled in just a few decades. But this growth wasn't glorious. Homes were thrown up so quickly and cheaply that families lived stacked on top of each other in damp, narrow, disease-ridden slums. Raw sewage flowed in the streets. But while the workers suffered, a new class of titans soared. Names like James Watt, George Stephenson, and Josiah Wedgwood became engines of unimaginable wealth and influence. Watt's steam engine didn't just power machines. It powered an entire economic revolution. Stephenson's locomotives didn't just move cargo. They annihilated distance, shrinking time and space. And Wedgwood used mass production to create pottery so consistent that for the first time, royalty and the middle class could own the exact same designs, a psychological revolution in what it meant to be a consumer. This was the birth of modern capitalism. Not the small-town trading of the past, but a ruthless industrial capitalism driven by investment, competition, and brutal efficiency. The factories consumed workers, but they also consumed the planet's resources at a scale humanity had never witnessed. Coal mining exploded. Iron production skyrocketed. Entire landscapes were permanently scarred, forests clear-cut, rivers diverted, mountains gutted. Environmental destruction didn't start with oil. It began with steam. Yet amid all this suffering, something extraordinary happened. Ordinary people started gaining access to things that had once been unattainable luxuries. Cheap cloth, affordable tools, faster travel, and a greater variety of food. The Industrial Revolution democratized consumption, but it was a cruel paradox. Factory owners became wealthy at a speed the world had never seen, while the workers who created that wealth lived on the brink of starvation, surrounded by goods they could never afford, producing products they would never own. But pressure creates explosions. By the early 19th century, society began to push back. For the first time in modern history, workers organized. You've probably heard of the Luddites, portrayed as angry mobs smashing machines, but the myth gets it wrong. They weren't anti-technology. They were skilled artisans resisting an economic system that was destroying their livelihoods. They weren't fighting progress. They were fighting for control over it. At the same time, governments were finally forced to confront the horrifying human cost. Reports of children crippled by millwork and miners suffocating underground sparked outrage. Reformers like Lord Shaftesbury campaigned relentlessly, leading to landmark laws like the Factory Act of 1833. This act limited child labor and, for the first time, introduced factory inspections. It was far from perfect, but it was a crack in the wall of industrial greed. And another revolution was brewing beneath the surface: the rise of the middle class. Clerks, managers, engineers, and shop owners, people who were neither aristocrats nor laborers, began to shape culture, politics, and innovation. For the first time in history, you didn't need a noble title to gain wealth. You needed ambition, opportunity, and often, a streak of ruthlessness. This fire didn't stay in Britain for long. It leaped across the Atlantic. America began to industrialize at a blistering pace: textiles in New England, steel in Pennsylvania. Inventors like Samuel Morse and Elias Howe laid the groundwork for industrial giants like Carnegie and Rockefeller, who would push industrial power to heights no one could have imagined. But America also inherited the same dark consequences: brutal labor conditions, environmental devastation, and staggering economic inequality. What they don't teach you in school is that the Industrial Revolution wasn't a single event. It was a chaotic, unstoppable chain reaction that transformed everything: how we use energy, how we work, how we live, our politics, our families, and the very essence of the human experience. Every invention created new problems, which required newer inventions to solve. It was a relentless cycle, a beast that fed on human ambition and human suffering in equal measure. By the mid-1800s, humanity was facing a profound paradox. We were, as a species, richer than ever before. But we were also more exhausted, more crowded, and more dependent on machines. For thousands of years we had lived at the pace of nature. Now for the first time we were living at the pace of steam, and that change echoes in everything we do to this day. We often think of the Industrial Revolution as a single event: steam engines, dark factories, a sudden leap forward. But the real story is much deeper. What happened in the mid-19th century wasn't just an upgrade. It was a second, more explosive wave of change that didn't just build factories. It built the modern world we live in right now. This was the era that rewired humanity. To understand how, you have to start with the backbone of modern civilization: steel. Before the 1850s, steel was a luxury metal, rare, expensive, and difficult to produce. But when Henry Bessemer perfected his revolutionary steelmaking process, the world changed almost overnight. Suddenly, steel was cheap, strong, and scalable. And with it, cities could rise vertically into the sky. Bridges could span impossible distances. Railroads could finally conquer continents. Without cheap steel, there would be no skyscrapers, no modern infrastructure, and no machines powerful enough to reshape entire economies. And from steel came the age of rail empires. Railroads weren't just about transportation, they were geopolitical weapons. They dictated trade routes, settlement patterns, and which cities would boom while others faded away. In the United States, the Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, stitched the Atlantic to the Pacific. A journey that once took months now took mere days, unleashing an economic explosion that fueled America's rise as a global power. In Russia, the vast Trans-Siberian Railway unified a disconnected empire into an industrial force. Even in British-ruled India, railroads transformed agriculture, commerce, and society itself. But railroads had an invisible, even stranger, impact. They turned time into a commodity so precious that the world had to invent something entirely new: standardized time zones. Before trains, every town and city ran on its own local time set by the sun, but trains needed precision. They ran on schedules, demanding synchronized networks. So, in 1884, global leaders gathered and carved up the world into the time zones we still use today. Think about that. Industry didn't just change what we built. It changed how we experienced the fundamental reality of time itself. And then came the force that would literally electrify the world. Few inventions have rewired civilization as profoundly as electricity. Scientists like Michael Faraday laid the groundwork, but it was innovators like Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, and George Westinghouse who unleashed its commercial power. Electric light bulbs replaced flickering gas lamps. Factories could now run 24/7. Cities began to glow through the night, and electric motors made machines faster, cleaner, and more efficient than ever before. Electricity fundamentally changed the rhythm of society. It extended the day, created nightlife, and enabled mass communication by powering telegraphs, telephones, and eventually, radio. It allowed humanity to conquer darkness, a psychological shift just as profound as the technological one. This era also birthed global communication. Samuel Morse's telegraph wires began to snake across continents. By the 1860s, the first transatlantic cable connected London and New York, allowing them to communicate in minutes instead of weeks. For the first time in history, humanity became a truly interconnected network. This was the birth of globalization. Financial markets, news, and diplomacy could now move at the speed of electricity. The world was no longer a disconnected patchwork of nations. It was becoming a single wired system. Meanwhile, a quiet revolution was happening in chemistry. New breakthroughs gave us powerful fertilizers, dyes, explosives, and pharmaceuticals. Factories produced synthetic colors that transformed fashion, making vibrant clothing accessible to the masses. New medical knowledge, like the use of antiseptics, drastically reduced infections and extended human life expectancy. Even our food changed forever. Canning, refrigeration, and new preservation methods revolutionized diets and allowed cities to grow larger than ever before. The industrial machine wasn't just building the world. It was beginning to rebuild the human body, but all this incredible progress cast a long shadow. A new staggering level of inequality emerged. The fortunes made during this period were almost unimaginable. In America, the so-called robber barons figures like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Vanderbilt accumulated wealth so vast that, even by today's standards, they remain among the richest people in history. Their companies controlled oil, rail, steel, and finance, the very pillars of the new global economy. For the first time, private individuals wielded enough power to influence governments and dictate the fate of nations. This massive concentration of wealth ignited new political fires. The modern labor movement was born in the crucible of the factory floor. Workers organized and massive strikes erupted across Europe and the United States as they fought for basic rights: a living wage, safer conditions, and the 8-hour workday. Women, who had entered the industrial workforce in huge numbers, began to mobilize, demanding the right to vote. Industrialization didn't just build cities. It built social movements that continue to shape our world. Yet the technological momentum was unstoppable. The assembly line, pioneered by Henry Ford, took industrial efficiency to its absolute peak. Mass production made goods cheaper and more accessible than ever. The automobile, once a toy for the rich, became a tool for the masses. And with the car came the suburbs, highways, a global dependence on oil, and a new kind of freedom and mobility that once again shrank the world. But this new power came with a terrifying price. The same industrial logic that created cars and skyscrapers was soon applied to warfare. Rapid industrial growth fueled intense competition between nations, and their new machines made conflict deadlier than ever before. This industrial mindset culminated in the catastrophic violence of World War I. Tanks, machine guns, chemical weapons, submarines, all were products of industrial thinking. The very tools that had built the modern world now gave it the capacity for unprecedented self-destruction. Even after the war, the machine didn't slow down. The 20th century brought us radios, airplanes, plastics, mass media, national power grids, and the first computers that would set the stage for our digital age. Every piece of modern technology we take for granted, our smartphones, the internet, our globalized lives, is a direct descendant of the innovations born in the Second Industrial Revolution. But perhaps the most overlooked legacy is how it reshaped our very identity. Before this era, most people lived by the rhythms of the sun and the seasons, in small communities with predictable roles. By the end of this age, humans lived in megacities, worked timed shifts, consumed mass-produced goods, and connected across global networks. It changed how we work, how we travel, what we eat, where we live, and what we believe is possible. It created the middle-class, consumer culture, the global economy, and its consequences, like pollution and climate change. It was more than a technological shift. It was a species-level transformation. We went from living in the slow rhythms of nature to a world powered by machines and defined by constant acceleration. The Industrial Revolution never really ended. It just evolved. Steam gave way to steel. Steel led to electricity. Electricity became information. And now information is becoming AI. We are living in the next chapter of a story that began in factories over 2 centuries ago. Understanding this history isn't about the past. It's about understanding the blueprint of our modern world, everything we use, consume, and believe. This isn't just history, it's the operating system of our lives. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past enlightening, be sure to subscribe for more stories that explain our present.